So my message to you today is simply that I believe that we all have the capability and capacity to give others one of the greatest gifts that will impact how they feel and what they do. And that gift is the gift of listening, listening to generate the very best in others. So let's start perhaps with why I think listening is critical, a critical skill for us in business and outside. Well, for those of you that might have read some of the information we sent out, the research suggests that on average, we as adults spend up to 70% of our time in some sort of communication. And of that 70%, 45% of it we spend listening. And if in an executive role, you'll be spending up to 80% of time listening. And it's interesting in this research that suggests that of those people in executive roles who spend up to 80% listening, actually self-assess themselves as only average listeners and do little to improve. Some of you may have come across Tom Peters, the author of In Pursuit of Excellence. And Tom Peters describes the 18-second manager. Here's the manager that will hold on for 18 seconds before he interrupts with a reply or making a diagnosis or offering a solution, leaving team members feeling frustrated, demotivated, and certainly undervalued. Other research suggests that it costs a staggering, on average, $50 million for large organizations who lose that amount of money through miscommunication, through poor listening, through conflict, through miscommunication, and through lower productivity. So I believe listening is critical. It's a critical skill, and it's one that's worth mastering. My own personal journey is that I discovered the skills and mindset of listening, this listening to generate the very best in others, over 10 years ago. And it was transformational. It transformed my life as a mum, as a wife, as a daughter, as a sister, and my business as a coach. And what I found is that through mastering the skills and mindset of listening deeply, I began to experience deeper relationships. My business grew year on year, and my clients accomplished more than they thought possible. And this transformation I'm sharing with you is one that was ignited by the work of Nancy Klein, the author and owner of Time to Think. And it was Nancy who awakened my mind and learning to listening to generate the very best in others. So I believe the challenge we find today is that we often overlook the skills and the impact of listening. We assume that we simply don't have time to listen, or that we are fearful and don't know how to respond to what we've listened to. We assume that we won't know how to handle what we've listened to. We assume that we need to fix the problem, even worse, fix the person. And we assume that we might be proved wrong, or we assume we already listen well enough. Whereas in reality, I experience that right now, more than ever, people want to be listened to. They want to be given the opportunity to share their thoughts and feelings. They want to be able to resolve conflict. They want to be able to reduce misunderstandings. They want to think for themselves, to create innovative solutions. And they want deeper relationships. People want to be listened to in order to do these things. So I'd love to come to you now and ask you the question, how good a listener are you? So I'd love to ask 3 questions. And the answer to these questions, and Warren, perhaps you might want to pop this in the chat, as the answers you'll want to choose are always, sometimes, or never. So for those of you who are bold, pop your answer in the chat. For those of you less so, just feel free to hold a note for yourself. So first question, how often do you find yourself interrupting others once you've got the gist of what they're saying? Be honest with yourself. All right, number 2, how often do you finish another sentence believing that you know what they're about to say? Always, sometimes, or never? And number 3, how often do you simply listen, waiting to speak? i.e. reloading, ready to reply, or forming your own solution? So if you've answered always or sometimes, which I can see some of you have, thank you for your honesty, to any of these questions, I encourage you to stay tuned in. So there are many different modalities and levels of listening. Through my coach training, I discovered the art of self-listening, pretend listening that we're all perhaps familiar with, empathetic listening, active listening, reflective listening. And as I mentioned, it was my journey with studying from Nancy Klein that I discovered the art of generative listening. This, in my experience, is the ultimate level of listening. It's a listening that liberates the mind rather than directs it. It helps others to generate new thoughts, new ideas, breakthroughs, and possibilities. Listening generatively is an active skill rather than the passive hearing. It is also a skill that fosters deep relationships. It sparks higher quality thinking in others, and it leads to good decision making. And in my experience, listening in this way is essential for outstanding leadership and parenting. What is the impact of listening to generate the best in others? Well, here I'd love to share with you different contexts with a practical tip, as I promised. So as a leader, when we listen generatively, when we listen in this way, it develops greater trust and respect. It also reduces the sense of being lonely, because great leaders are great listeners. They listen to their team members. They listen to their needs, their aspirations, their frustrations, and their wins. So if you're a leader of a team or in an organization, my practical tip is to have regular check-ins with your team members at the beginning of a meeting in a word, and simply ask the question in a word or short phrase. Describe how you feel today. As a parent, listening in this way reduces misunderstandings, it resolves conflict, and it generates possibilities and opportunities for growth. So as a practical tip, when a child comes up to you and says, hey, mum or dad, I'm super frustrated. My teacher has given me yet another essay to write. That's 4 this week, and I just don't understand why. This is the time, a great opportunity to listen. So close down your laptop, remove your phone, and listen to help your child navigate away from frustration to a better place. And the last context, as a team member or family member, we found that listening in this way helps confidence, self-confidence develop, as well as self-esteem, and reveals a more creative and innovative solutions. So imagine a team member coming up to you and saying, I'm really struggling to balance my work and home or family commitments just now, especially in this new hybrid way of working. And here we have an opportunity then to ask them a question that might, what might be stopping you from finding that balance? What might you be assuming about yourself, about the situation, about others that stops you finding the balance that you choose right now? So I want to come back to those questions that I asked you. So for any of you who answered the first question with sometimes or always, the thing is, when you interrupt another, the brain receives that interruption like a physical assault, quite literally, and we hijack their thinking. It takes them a while to get back on track if they ever do. Secondly, if you answered always or sometimes to the second question, when you finish the sentence of another, and quite quite frequently we do. It's something we do. I used to be so proud of the fact that I could finish my husband's sentence thinking I knew him so well, I knew what he was about to say. But what I realize is that when we do that, we rob them of the opportunity to share what they think and express what they feel. Because what matters is not what we're about to say, but what happens when they're about to say what they want to say. And thirdly, are you listening or just waiting to speak? You see, in my experience, opinions are valued and valuable when asked for, but they can be most detrimental to an individual or a team and a boardroom when they're not. So I would love to wrap up this 10-minute insight by sharing with you what many people ask me. They ask me the question, well, this all makes great sense, Jane, but how do I become a better listener? So to get started to developing good listening skills, I have a short mnemonic for you, and that's easy to remember, which is ears. So first of all, make eye contact. Reduce any distractions, close down the laptop, move your phone out of sight and give your attention. It's a skill. So give your attention with your eye contact to let the person know that you are listening. The A stands for ask open questions, those that do not require a yes or no answer, rather perhaps start most often with what. R is to resist that urge to interrupt, resisting that urge to interrupt so that you don't hijack the other person's thinking. And perhaps ask yourself the question, how do I know that what I'm about to say is of any greater value than what you're about to think? And lastly, S, silence. Get comfortable with silence and resist that urge to fill the space. It takes time for people to process information, what you're saying. And if you ask a question, allow them the space to think of their answer. So my message to you today is don't become a statistic for poor listening. Rather, my invitation is to be intentional and develop further your listening skills in service of others. Because when we listen, we show how much we care. And one of my favorite quotes is Maya Angelou, who describes, and some of you may know this, people will forget what you said and what you do, but they will never forget how you made them feel.